Right, let's jump into this. Ephesians 6:4. We're doing a deep dive today.
We are done.
Now, our listeners, pastors, Bible study leaders, they know this verse,
Oh, yeah, inside and out.
but they're here for something more,
Right.
that fresh perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They want to bring something new, something
Neat.
to their next sermon, to their next Bible study.
Exactly. They want to move beyond just obey your parents, you know. We've
Yeah.
all heard that one a million times. We're looking for those non-obvious insights.
So that's our mission today.
Yeah.
And we've been looking at all sorts of sermons.
All kinds.
Big churches, small churches, traditional, modern.
Yeah. Trying to get a sense of how different pastors are unpacking Ephesians 6:4 for their congregations.
And is there, what kind of common threads are there?
Well, one thing that really jumped out at me was how many pastors are kind of reframing that whole obedience through authority thing.
Okay, so less about the strict,
Yeah.
parent-child
The authoritarian approach.
authority. Give me an example.
So Zion Church Media, they had a sermon that really digs into the Greek word for bring them up.
Okay.
It's not just about like giving orders.
Yeah.
It actually translates more closely to nourish.
Nourish. So it's less about controlling your kids and more about creating an environment where they can...
Thrive. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
good.
And Abundant Life Community Church, they kind of took this idea of nurturing even further, talking about treating children with respect and dignity, not just as subordinates.
Which, thinking back to Ephesus.
Right.
I mean, historically, fathers had absolute authority.
It's true.
So to even suggest that there should be this mutual respect...
It would have been pretty radical
It would have.
back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine Paul, urging parents towards this mutual respect.
And, tying that back into the nourishing.
Yeah.
Respect is a form of nourishment. I like that.
Absolutely.
So how are pastors today taking this idea that would have been radical back then
Right.
and making it relevant for their congregations?
Well, Zion Church Media, they use this great analogy of a dial.
Okay.
They're talking about parental influence as a dial that needs constant adjusting as children grow.
Ah, interesting.
So it's about moving away from that authoritarian parent figure to a more intentional relational approach.
I like that. The dial analogy. It's something pastors can really use.
Visual.
Yeah, to help parents in their own congregations visualize that shift in approach.
Absolutely.
But Ephesians 6:4, it does specifically call out fathers, right?
It does.
What are some of the unique insights that we saw about the father's role?
Well, there's some really fascinating stuff in there, some different viewpoints. Christ Church, they really emphasize the father's responsibility to provide.
Okay.
And not just materially, putting food on the table, but also spiritually. Nurturing their faith. Yeah.
Which, that's a heavy responsibility.
It is.
And then you add in that whole aspect of discipline.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
Yeah. And we saw quite a few sermons tackle that.
Definitely.
And they didn't all agree on the best approach, did they?
Not necessarily.
What were some of the differences?
So you had First Baptist Church Forney. They had a sermon that was all about surrendering to God's plan for your child,
Okay.
even when it comes to discipline.
So letting go of that need to control every outcome, trusting in God's sovereignty.
That's it.
Okay.
But then you have GVCF Church, and they were all about maintaining parental authority,
Right.
but in a way that doesn't crush the child's spirit.
Okay, before you go on, tell me a little bit more about
Sure.
what they mean by crushing a child's spirit.
Yeah.
Because that could mean a lot of different things.
It could.
Is it about specific actions, or is it more an overall...
It's more about the overall approach, the tone.
Yeah.
They stress that while authority is necessary,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be exercised in a way that makes the child feel worthless or incapable,
Yeah.
It's finding that balance between setting boundaries and nurturing a child's confidence and sense of self.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, they used a bus driver analogy.
A bus driver. Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me about this bus driver.
Okay, so imagine a bus driver who lets the kids on board take over the wheel.
Oh, no.
Complete chaos, right?
Yeah.
The driver needs to be in control for everyone's safety.
Right.
But that doesn't mean they have to be a tyrant.
Right.
They can be firm and authoritative while still treating the passengers with respect.
Okay. So applying that to parenting, it's about being this steady hand guiding the bus, not a dictator who squashes any sense of individuality or free will.
That's it.
And this actually, it
Yeah.
makes me think of, there was a word that came up,
Oh, yeah.
that Greek word exasperate.
Exasperates, right. It's not just about making kids angry. It's about provoking them to the point where their spirit is broken.
Which is such an important nuance for us as pastors, as teachers, to highlight, because we want to encourage parents to discipline effectively, but not in a way that damages their relationship with their children.
Exactly.
But where does grace fit into all of this?
Mm.
This talk about authority, about discipline, where's the grace?
That's a great question, and one that Christ Church actually brought up beautifully in their sermon.
Okay.
They talked about extending grace not just to children, but to fathers as well.
That's interesting,
Yeah.
because it's easy to focus on grace for the kids, but what about grace for the parents?
Right.
Who are inevitably going to make mistakes.
Exactly. We're all human. We all mess up.
Yeah.
And that includes dads.
Dads.
Yeah. And they emphasize the importance of creating a family culture where mistakes are seen as opportunities for growth and reconciliation, not reasons for shame or condemnation.
And that brings us to a really important point.
Right.
How can we use these insights, especially this idea of grace for fathers, to help the families in our congregations build healthier relationships? I mean, we're not just here to dissect sermons.
Right.
We want to equip people to actually live out these principles.
Absolutely. And that's where the power of these sermon illustrations come in,
Yeah.
They give us, as pastors and Bible study leaders,
Right.
tangible tools, things we can share with our congregations.
Yeah.
We can help parents see that it's okay to not be perfect, to make mistakes,
Right.
and to extend that same grace
Yeah.
to their children and to themselves.
It's like we're giving them permission to be human,
Exactly.
to embrace the messiness of family life without feeling like failures.
Absolutely. And when we talk about grace for fathers specifically,
Yeah.
it's a reminder that they don't have to carry the weight of the world on their shoulders.
Mhm.
They're not alone in this journey. They have a community, a church family that's there to support them.
It really does take a village,
It
right?
does.
Especially when you consider all the challenges families face today.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about discipline or providing for your kids.
Right.
It's about navigating a world that's constantly changing and throwing curveballs their way.
And that's where Ephesians 6:4, even with its ancient context,
Yeah.
still holds such relevance.
Mhm.
It's a foundation for building resilience, for equipping families to face whatever life throws at them.
So how can we use these sermons, these unique perspectives on Ephesians 6:4, to help parents prepare their kids for the real world?
Yeah.
Because it's not about sheltering them.
Yeah.
It's about equipping them to thrive amidst the challenges.
You're hitting on a key point there, that balance between protection and exposure.
Yeah.
And one sermon that really tackled this was from In the Middle podcast.
Okay.
They use this really relatable example of taking their kids to see Star Wars.
Ooh, Star Wars.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm a Star Wars fan myself, so I'm interested now.
Right.
How does Star Wars relate to Ephesians 6:4?
So the speaker, he talked about taking his kids to see one of the movies, but during a particularly intense scene, he realized it was too much for them. And he actually took them out of the theater.
I can see how that would resonate with parents.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't been in a situation where you're trying to gauge what your kids can handle?
Exactly.
It's that constant dilemma. Do you shield them or expose them?
It's that balance.
Yeah.
And this pastor used that experience to illustrate the delicate balance between protecting our kids from the harsh realities of the world and preparing them to face those realities head on.
It's not about avoiding the dark side altogether.
Right.
It's about equipping them with the tools
Exactly.
and the resilience to confront it when they encounter it.
Yes. And that brings us back to that idea of nourishing.
Yeah.
From the Greek translation.
Right.
It's not just about food and shelter.
Mm-hmm.
It's about giving our kids the emotional, spiritual, and even psychological nourishment they need to face the world with confidence.
Well said.
And to take this idea of preparation a step further,
Okay.
First Baptist Church, Peachtree City, used this brilliant analogy, the transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly.
Okay, I'm seeing a theme here with these pastors and their creative analogies.
Yeah.
So how does a caterpillar relate to raising kids, especially in today's world?
Well, they talked about how the caterpillar needs a safe, controlled environment, the cocoon, to undergo its metamorphosis. And while it's in there, it's going through some pretty radical transformations,
Right.
breaking down and rebuilding itself.
So are they saying we should keep our kids in a bubble?
Mm-hmm.
Because that doesn't seem very realistic or helpful,
No, not at all.
especially with all the pressures and influences they face outside the home.
Right. It's not about keeping them in a bubble. It's about recognizing that they need a safe space,
Right.
a cocoon, if you will,
Yeah.
where they can wrestle with their faith, develop their values, and build their resilience.
So the cocoon represents the boundaries and guidance we provide,
Yeah.
while still allowing space for them to grow and change.
Yes, we're not trying to prevent them from becoming butterflies. We're creating the environment where they can safely and effectively go through that transformation.
And if we connect that back to the challenges of parenting in today's world,
Yeah.
it's about giving kids the tools they need to navigate the pressures of social media, the complexities of relationships, and the ever-present temptations that surround them.
You got it.
Right.
It's about helping them develop that inner strength and moral compass so they're not just blown about by every wind of change or cultural trend.
So we've talked about the father's role,
Mm.
the need for grace, this balance between protection and exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But what about moms?
Right.
I mean, Ephesians 6:4 doesn't explicitly mention mothers,
It doesn't.
but they play a huge role in raising kids.
You're absolutely right. And while none of the sermons we looked at explicitly focused on mothers,
Okay.
the principles we've been discussing apply equally to them. In fact, many of the illustrations, like the dial analogy or the cocoon metaphor, resonate even more strongly when you consider the nurturing role that mothers often play.
That's a good point. So how can we, as pastors and Bible study leaders, make sure we're not inadvertently excluding mothers when we teach on Ephesians 6:4?
Right.
Because we want to equip all parents,
Yes.
regardless of gender roles or family structure.
It's about being intentional with our language and examples.
Yeah.
Instead of defaulting to father, we can use terms like parents or caregivers.
Right.
We can share stories that highlight the unique strengths and contributions of both mothers and fathers in raising godly children.
And maybe even challenge some of those traditional assumptions about gender roles in parenting.
Sure.
Because let's be real, in many families today, those lines are blurred.
They are.
You have dads who are the primary caregivers,
Mm-hmm.
moms who are the breadwinners, and everything in between.
Absolutely.
Ephesians 6:4 is about the heart of parenting,
Yes.
the principles of nurture, discipline, and guidance,
Mhm.
regardless of who's fulfilling those roles.
That's right.
So how can we help parents, both mothers and fathers,
Yeah.
move beyond those rigid gender stereotypes and embrace a more collaborative,
Right.
supportive approach to raising their kids?
That's where creating a sense of community within the church becomes so vital. You know, we can offer support groups specifically for mothers, for fathers,
Yeah.
and even for blended families or single parents.
Right.
We can create opportunities for parents to connect, share their struggles, and learn from each other.
Because ultimately it's about empowering parents to feel confident and equipped,
Exactly.
regardless of their circumstances or family structure.
That's it. And we can do that by providing them with practical tools, biblical insights, and a supportive community where they know they're not alone in this journey.
And speaking of tools and insights, we've talked about a lot of great sermon illustrations so far. The dial, the bus driver, the cocoon.
Yeah.
Are there any others that stand out as particularly helpful for pastors and Bible study leaders?
Absolutely. One that really resonated with me was from First Baptist Church Forney. They used the story of Moses' parents placing him in a basket on the Nile
Oh, wow.
as an act of trust in God's plan.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. But how does it relate to Ephesians 6:4
Right.
and the challenges parents face today?
It's about surrendering our children to God's care, even when we don't understand his plan
Yeah.
or see the bigger picture. Just like Moses' parents had to trust that God would protect and provide for their son,
Mm-hmm.
we too need to relinquish control
Right.
and have faith that God is working in our children's lives, even amidst the uncertainties and challenges of today's world.
It's a great example of taking a familiar Bible story and connecting it to a modern parenting dilemma.
Right.
It reminds us that these ancient stories still hold profound truths for us today.
Absolutely. And it's not just about using these illustrations in sermons, it's about helping parents apply these principles to their everyday lives. We can create discussion questions or small group activities that encourage parents to reflect on how they can cultivate a deeper trust in God's plan for their children.
That's so true. We need to make sure these insights don't just stay theoretical.
Right.
We want parents to walk away feeling equipped and empowered,
Yes.
not just entertained.
Absolutely. And speaking of feeling equipped, we can't forget about the practical side of parenting.
Yeah,
Ephesians 6:4, it's not just about spiritual formation, it's about providing for our children's physical and emotional needs as well.
absolutely. So how can we help parents navigate the practical challenges of raising kids in today's world? Because it's not just about putting food on the table.
Right.
It's about dealing with things like screen time, social media, peer pressure, all those things that can feel overwhelming for parents.
That's where creating resources and support systems within the church can be so valuable.
Oh.
We can host workshops on topics like managing screen time or dealing with bullying or navigating the teenage years.
Connect parents with each other
Exactly.
so they have a network of support and don't feel like they're going through these challenges alone.
It's about building that sense of community, that village mentality,
Yeah,
where parents can share their struggles, celebrate their victories, and learn from one another's experiences.
because ultimately that's what Ephesians 6:4 is all
Uh,
about, isn't it? Creating a loving and supportive environment where children can thrive and grow
Mhm.
into the unique individuals God created them to be.
It is. It's a reminder that parenting is a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
It's full of ups and downs, challenges, and triumphs.
Right.
And it's something we do together, supporting and encouraging one another along the way.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Ephesians 6:4, I hope you're walking away not just with fresh perspectives and sermon illustrations, but with a renewed sense of purpose and inspiration for your ministry.
And remember, you don't have to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to ask the right questions, to create space for dialogue and exploration, and to trust that God is working in and through you as you equip parents in your congregation to raise the next generation of faith.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Ephesians 6:4. Until next time, may you find joy and wisdom in your journey as you shepherd the families entrusted to your care.